Hello and welcome to another Six Sages Gaming Duel Series. Today we have for you a wonderful match between the Fire Ice Warrior of Light list that made top 8 of one of the, I believe it was Japan Regionals. You can find that list on Mognet. And then on the right we have the Mono Water Standard Unit list that we had posted just a couple days ago, and is really focused on primarily A with the other Warrior Light and buffing 2k in first strike versus the plan B of it, which is the Tidus blitz acing for the win. So of course, as always, both of our opponents are going to be kicking it off with some backups to start. So Mono Water bringing down that, of course, 2-cost unit, which reduces all of the summons in the deck by 1, and then the Astro backup, which lets you activate, which that is going to be a key card in this matchup. As you know, we don't see it yet, but we know our opponent is playing Ice because we sat down and we talked about it, and we know how important that card can be. Simply put, it is one of the best water backups that you can be playing. And if you are playing Mono Water, I think it's the one that you would always play. And if you're playing a dual element deck, depending on what your backup configuration is looking like, you also want to consider running it if you can have 2 other backups. So here we're going to be dropping just a couple pairs of Vikings. What we're trying to do is draw into some cards and find our Warrior Light or our better, higher powerful cards. So, you know, we can't really do much about that Warrior Light. Seeing that Waka backup would have been great, but we want to keep some Vikings on the field, knowing that we got to have a really big Tidus for our plan B, since he's going to get bigger with every other forward that we have on the field. So Fire Ice player realizes that he's going to try to take the more aggressive route, discarding his other red mage there, putting out a land into the field, and of course that AK Warrior of Light is going to give us some trouble in the meantime, because it's very difficult to block unless we have the Water Warrior Light up to buff our team, and then of course we still need something like a Knight that's also buffed by Waka. The pass back, looks like there's a Mime, a Geomancer, Leviathan, so we're having all these standard unit parts of the deck that we're drawing into. Playing Mime here would be a fair choice as well, and it looks like we do have the Tidus in hand. Mime, so we can start drawing some more cards, hopefully dig into our Warrior Light, find it eventually. But here we're just playing it safe. We're going to keep 4 cards in our hand, hopefully draw some cards up on the next turn, and really just try to leverage those cards in our hand and be able to build a big board state, and then use that 1-cost Leviathan to pump the team by 2,000, which in this case as well would make an amazing battle trick to have in our pocket. Vayne in the Fire Ice player's hand is just a dead card, so it looks like land is going to be getting in for some damage. Unfortunately, we flip a Warrior Light, which would have been just the best top deck we could have possibly had there. Drawing the other Yuna, it's a dead card, so we're really just using that in the deck again as a Leviathan, bounce Leviathan specifically, 4 and 5. Finally getting the Waka down, so it's going to buff our entire team plus 1k. Again, our opponent is threatening the Warrior of Light block, so we can't really do much against it in that situation. We'd have to have a couple more tricks up our sleeves for buffing. So here he's just going to have the cleanup effect for Mime here, so I don't get to draw any cards. And here he's going to draw the Shiva EX Burst, and he's looking which one of the Vikings lets us draw a card when it leaves the field, so that is the 1-cost version. Having that out of the way makes sense, so we can't just block with it and trade up when it might be, or trade so we can draw a card when it's necessary. Again, ultimately we have that Astro backup, so we're not that scared of freeze effects, dull and freeze effects I should say, because in a pinch we can just leave up that 1 backup, sacrifice a card from our hand, and activate any one of our forwards at any given time. And here is a Geomancer coming down, just a 7k body now thanks to the plus 1000 power Waka backup. Interesting note here is that it can block land, except we get to draw a card, so that's a huge boost in our favor. So that immediately is presenting a card that our opponent is going to have to care about to at least some degree, of course. As soon as we play that Warrior of Light, it's going to get buffed in its power, and land will be able to get under it. And I can't see, it looks like he didn't have another red card in his hand, but the Belias here is certainly a good play here as well. He could attack with, he has the Bahamut, which I guess you don't want to give up, but ideally what he could do here is attack with land, use, let me block with Geomancer, use Belias, so it still count as being blocked. You would have the plus 1000 power in first strike, and then my Geomancer would just die for no value. That certainly feels like a great way to manage the board state a little bit more, and our opponent would get to draw a card. In this case, he's just deciding to play a little bit safer, using the Devout. Again, the Vane's not going to come into play probably hardly at all in this matchup. Discarding the Bahamut makes us feel pretty good. It looks like he has 2 Bahamuts in the bin already, so we're feeling fairly safe about being able to flood the board and get some of our key forwards out there, but that's something you always want to make sure. The key part of this deck is that you can't force or rush your game plan. You have to know exactly when is right to play the Warrior Light, or maybe to play the Tidus to set up the Blitz Ace next turn. There's a lot of careful considerations that you have to take when you're playing a mono element list. And the primary reason for that is because there's a much smaller number of cards that your opponent inherently has to play around, because you're stuck to that one element. So there's only, what, 50 cards, I think, per element, or some small number like that. So it's very easy to determine what your opponent might have if they're only in one element. And that is absolutely a big reason for playing 2 and or more elements. Here we decide to play the Rosa. Again, as if you watched our deck spotlight, it's one of the deck cards that's going to be moved out for Opus 3, probably in the favor of Eco or Mog. Or both, I should say, and then whatever other backups we might get with the booster set. But it was in the original list. We decided to keep it in, and it is going to draw us a few cards in this game. So it's worth, testing it out, seeing how you guys like it. And if there's a lot of spells in your meta, then Rosa is a card that absolutely is worth going into the deck. So here he plays it about for no real value. It's just an 8k attacker. I can't say I'm really a big fan of this play, only because Vayne isn't tapping anything down with this effect, and it just clears away if we have a Cecil or something else. But it doesn't give our opponent the opportunity to say, he's not going to use a special effect, nothing like that. It's just an 8k forward. So because he's already winning the power match on the board, I wouldn't have been too upset with just holding on to the resources, maybe playing a different backup, using the 2 of them to play for another cost, what have you. So we do have the Warrior of Light in our hand, and we do have the ability to pay, use our 4 backups to pay for it. And we do have Leviathan, which costs 2. And here I was mostly just trying to do some math to determine which would kind of be the better play to go. If I want to use the Warrior Light and maybe try to get a party attack in so our guy can swing through and not just get chumped by Warrior Light. But here we just decided to go to 5 backups. So we have all 5 of our backups in play that we'd want. We still have a very good hand size. And again, we're still just trying to play out our turn and determine when is the right time to pull the trigger on what our deck wants to be doing. And again, this position, I think the Fire Ice player was being just a little too reserved, if only because that Warrior of Light can just be turning sideways every single turn at this point, unless he's trying to threaten having one in hand, because that Geomancer isn't going to be all that exciting to play, and that Geomancer only becomes a bigger threat as the game goes on. At the very least, I would have liked to have seen an attack from Vayne there. Again, understanding that it is just a vanilla 8,000 power forward in this case. So Tidus is going to come down. It's going to be an 11,000. It's getting +3 from the forwards and plus 1k from Waka. So it's going to be well above the Bahamut threshold. And again, because we have Minwu, it's not going to, we don't have to worry about him comboing it away or what have you. The thing is, we just have to make sure that we keep our other forwards on the board. So it does look like our opponent has the other Warrior Light in his hand, which is something he was probably trying to play around. Again, in this case, I would like to see another red mage come down here and hopefully build up his backups so he could say that, your 2 best blockers per turn can't block, and that certainly would have helped him be a little bit more aggressive as well. thanks to having Astro as one of our backups, and again, because we are playing mono water, we have the luxury of having 2 other water backups to pay for it. We can now just threaten a Tidus that is going to attack every single turn, and being able to activate on our opponent's turn in case he tries to block. We can just freely activate it, and then thanks to Minwoo, it's just going to create a wall that our opponent can't get past. Again, the exception here being the land that's on his side of the field, because it cannot be blocked by something that has great power greater than him. So the other downside to consider is whenever you're playing a deck that's heavy on specials, we can see that the Fire Ice player has 2 copies of Warrior Light in his hand that's just not doing anything, and a Vayne. So perhaps not the best attacks that were happening in turn per se, but we're in a position where the draws of our opponent have been very lackluster in terms of what he's seeing. When Geomancer dies, we're going to draw a card. We officially have all the cards in our hand, and now our opponent is going to swing through with land, which again, if we wish to block it, we'd have to use one of our Vikings, which are just going to chump. I decided to chump with the Viking, draw another card, and get to have all these wonderful cards in my hand. At this point, the game plan is just to go for critical mass. Yes, Tidus is going to fall down to his size, but I didn't have to worry about playing around anything at that point, and now I'm able to play multiple forwards in this turn thanks to having 5 backups and drawing all the extra cards. So we're able to very quickly refill our board presence and have now suddenly very relevant threats. The other perhaps good thing here is that anytime now we draw a backup, it's a free discard in the sense that we can't play any more of them, so it's a card that we want to make sure that we're using for cost, like us discarding the Minwoo there. And here we get to play the Quistis and put a Knight into the field, which is one of the best standard units in the deck. Perhaps the best, if only because it's a 7k that then gets buffed up to a quite relevant size, given the blue Warrior of Light. And now we're in that position that we had mentioned where we have a very large potential Blitz Ace threat that we can now use Astro to activate at any point. And now here all our Vikings are getting plus 1,000 power from Quistis and plus 1,000 power from the Waka backup. Again, I really wish Quistis could buff 3 drops as well, but certainly understand, especially with this board state of the Knight, why she is not allowed to buff 3 drops as well. It would simply be too good. And here we see our opponent counting out a lot of cards, which always just comes down to, hey, I'm trying to figure out what I'm discarding to use this Bahamut. So another Knight goes to the damage zone, which is unfortunate because, again, we really would have liked to have seen the other, another Knight. So it looks like just a pass here. He does have the Bahamut, trying to figure out when he's going to fire it off. Needs to get the most value out of it. Again, not being able to kill Tidus certainly hurts here a lot, but eventually he's going to have to use it to try to stabilize the board a little bit. So here we just have, yet again, a full grip of cards, 5 backups. It feels absolutely great with the number of cards you get to draw in the mono water list. A consideration to be made here is when we were building the older standard unit list, when they were wind water, you do have access to some backups which, you know, give them a little bit more power. You have Maria as well. And I think overall I do like the wind water variant better. But with Opus 3 around the corner and with us getting cards like Garnet, who acts as a huge buff whenever you play a summon, so it turns your Leviathan giving plus 2,000 to all your forwards, if they're water, to plus 3,000 instead for 1 crystal point, which is absolutely absurd in terms of a power swing. So I am certainly looking forward to updating the mono water list for Opus 3. And here you see us using Blitz Ace, because again, why not? We've taken 3 points of damage, we have the card in our hand, and we have Minwoo, so there is stone nothing our opponent can do about the Tidus attacking 3 times for this turn and our opponent losing cards if he wants to block. And this is our opponent saying that he might have a response to the blitz ace itself. So just some communication back and forth just to make understands like, okay, I'm in combat now. I like to declare my attacker. Do you have any effects? You know, our opponent doesn't necessarily respond right away with anything here, so he's just going to decide if he wants to block with anything. Again, Vayne here is not doing a whole lot. Really wish that card would have been turning sideways sooner, but now it's just an 8k blocker really at this point. So our opponent gives us the okay to go to battle. Mime can attack, so we put him to the back. So Tidus is going to be attacking 3 times here. Here our opponent hits a Zengen, which, sorry about that, it is off camera, but he will get to 2-drop another Tifa. And then as soon as we cut the deck, we're going to be hitting for that 3rd point of damage. And again, Tidus does have the issue with being a card where if your opponent has quite literally any interaction with your turn when you're trying to blitz ace, it is a fairly easy card to counter. However, I think this is one of those instances where it just goes to show its strength, and how getting one card being able to get in multiple attacks in a turn is certainly worth it. Here our opponent says that he's going to dull Tidus, and we just decide that we're going to be putting it back to active, so we use Astro. And I forget exactly where in the sequence this was at, but I said I was going to Leviathan one of his cards just to force his forward off the table. And here we had a little bit of a miscommunication because Tidus wouldn't be able to attack a 4th time. There was a discussion around, you know, what other forward might he have dulled. So that was kind of a mistake on my end as I was rushing through it. So he was going to, you know, kill Quistis, dull the knight, therefore shrinking my 2-drops and seeing what that would do and help stabilizing his board. And it certainly makes us very sad that our Tidus is going to be dropping down in power, still above that 10k mark, thankfully, which, again, it is quite difficult to play around that all the time. So here Tidus should be at 4. Looks like we had missed that on the dice. And here's the point where I was talking about, where our opponent can just battle trick with a Blias, give it for a strike, and draw a card off of it, which certainly feels great. So our opponent is taking the moment to count through what is in his break zone. And an interesting note about this match is, given the current board state and that we've been able to get him through a couple points of damage, yes, keeping in mind it's been with Tidus, but I think that is just a critical importance of understanding, you know, not every game will you draw the Warrior of Light, so it's very important that every single deck has multiple ways to win. Right now, the Viking and the Mime certainly isn't doing anything for the deck, other than just being some potential blockers, so we actually have forwards on the board, but ultimately they are a little bit lacking in terms of their strength in this board state. So a bit more talking, going back and forth, trying to understand what is going to happen. And we recorded this a few days ago, so I don't remember all the comments that were happening, but I think this is where he finally decides that he's going to use the Bahamut. He was just trying to figure out what is the best choices. Again, of course, he can't kill it with Tidus. So his best targets would be Mime and the Viking that doesn't draw me a card, just to shrink down Tidus and maybe make it a more manageable power size on his next turn, so he can use something like Blias the Vayne and block. I think that would be his, you know, his best action if that's what he wants to do. but ultimately it's, you know, we have 2 cards in hand where you just have to assume that they're both forwards or at least relevant summons at this point. So we're going to be putting at least 2 more forwards back in the board. That's going to push Tidus back up to a much larger size, and it's going to be very difficult for our opponent to get past that card. And again, the fact that we're able to activate it with Astro is just insane. So here we're having the discussion that, again, he's not going to kill the Viking. That's going to let us draw a card. It's going to put Tidus down in value. And then because he targeted our guys with a summon, we're going to be drawing a card off of Rosa. And here he's breaking the Devout to bring back Renoa, just trying to stabilize a little bit more, because when Renoa goes to the break zone, you dull all your opponent's forwards. However, we have the Astrologian, so if we just have the ability to go for it, we're able to activate our Tidus in a pinch and just negate the effect of that card. So here we're trying to play around a few different things, and I knew it wasn't another, it couldn't, I guess I should say, be another Bahamut, so we're fine playing around a Belias here. So we had to make sure that we played the last card to make it a more a relevant size, push it up to that 10 instead of just a 9. So here with our first attack, we're going to attack. He's going to break Renoa. Renoa's effect is going to dull our other 2 forwards. We use Astrologian, whichever it is. The other guys dull, activate Tidus, and then keep swinging for points of damage. And again, at this point, our opponent is at exactly 6, so he has to block everything that we're putting out. Ultimately, can't do anything to come back from the board state, and couldn't get an answer to draw him out of it. So now we're going to be going into game 2, and again, important to note that you're able to draw, or when you get the draw power from the deck and you find the Tidus, that sometimes Blitz Ace is just good enough to get you that win. So opponents starting off with Tifa's Trainer. Again, a very solid card from the Final Fantasy VII starters. If you're watching this and you haven't bought the Opus 1 starters yet, I very strongly recommend you do check those out. There was a restock actually the week that we recorded this. So if you are watching this in the beginning of June, talk to your LGS, go online. I know that Troll and Toad might have it. There's a few different online retailers that would probably have starters in stock and be able to get you those cards. And again, those starter exclusive cards, Zangan and some of the tutors that they have, whether it be Mog, Jesse, and I'm drawing a blank on the lightning one, or not the lightning one, but the brother, there we go, brother from Final Fantasy X, are all very important cards to have going forward, so don't wait too long to get those. So again, starting the games off, we're going to have a couple of backups. With the Viking, opponent is going to play that Zangan and then have a land to bring it up. So again, land is a very interesting card here because it's not something that we, from a power perspective, can match up with all that well. We're either way under the card or way above the card in terms of power. So it's something that certainly gives us a little bit of difficulty, and we have to be careful how we manage our power boosting effects, because the best case is that we're going to have a Geomancer with a Waka on the field and block like we did for the previous game. But if we have Waka and then say Cecil or something, it puts us above land's power, unfortunately. So turning land sideways, getting a point of damage, and then following it up with Feint. Again, a card I really don't like in this matchup because it's not really doing much other than being an 8k punch you in the face kind of guy, but sometimes you just don't have a more relevant forward to play, unfortunately. And it looks like his hand was a bit difficult. I probably would have liked to have seen the Tifa come down there instead, just to get another point of damage in, but might also be worth holding onto that a little bit longer just so you can make sure that you're water kicking your way to victory. Again, knowing how to use your resources, using your life total rather as a resource, can certainly help in this matchup because the Mono Water deck can take a little bit longer to get set up, so you certainly don't mind taking those early points of damage. And here you can see sometimes you just get to have it all and hit that Leviathan and put a card back in your opponent's hand, which can help you stabilize and give you the extra turns you need to set up. Again, taking the time, we have 4 backups. Now we're going to be able to play every card off the top of our deck with ease, except of course a Cecil because it's 5 and not 4, but we can play the vast majority of our deck with just the backups we have and grind out our opponent with just pure card advantage going forward. So here again, we're just discarding backups to play other backups. We're going to play the min move finally that we have. Again, not doing that much in this matchup per se, but now we do get to have the chance to bring down an 8k knight. And this is exactly what I was mentioning. So land, again, we can't really do anything about it. Knight is now automatically bigger, and our opponent's like, cool, I can just have all these free attacks now. Thank you for doing that. So again, just using our life total as a resource. We don't want to lose our Viking yet in case when we finally draw, say, a Mime and a Warrior of Light so we can start being aggressive with it. Or maybe we draw a Leviathan or hit a well-timed EX burst, force our opponent a forward back to our opponent's hand, and then get in an extra point of damage because we kept that Viking around. So it's all about knowing when to block and when is best to sacrifice those forwards. And again, we do see our opponent has a Jill in his hand, which, lucky for us, isn't really doing much for him because we do have the Astro backup already, and we just have the ability to activate any of our forwards when he might try to freeze it otherwise. So here we're going to play the 1-drop Viking. Again, when it leaves the field, we get to draw a card, so it's not going to do anything other than be a potential chump blocker here for when we need it. Again, being able to stop that land for a couple turns is probably going to be very important to us. And it looks like the rest of the cards in our hand are just terrible. Yep, so at this point we're just bluffing. We have Leviathan if we absolutely need to use it, hopefully not having to use it. And then we can just follow up with Titus again. Again, can't stress enough in this deck how important it can be. It's a huge body, and Blitz Ace will win you games. So again, even if we're going forward and we were going to build this a deck, and say our 2 win backups that we're going to use would be Arc, I believe is the name of the backup that gives your units plus 1000 power, and Maria would be the other one to give them plus 1000 power, and then you have Astro and whatever your 2 other backups you'd want to use. Of course, Minmu probably being one of them, so you have 1 flex spot in water to be whatever that last card is that you would want to be. Looks like our opponent is trying to consider playing the Tifa. Again, now land is starting to pose a problem to us. We go to 4 points of damage. We really, again, still can't interact with it favorably. And our opponent is able to play a Tifa and potentially leave up a water kick. And the thing I will say is, Astro is just, again, such an important card in this matchup. Again, keeping in mind that we can only activate it once, but it does force our opponent to have, say, a water kick and a Shiva to make sure our Titus doesn't just activate. So our opponent has to burn a lot of resources to make sure we don't have a solid blocker left up on our side. And here again, we can just see the, hey, we're just going to draw into Blitz Ace again, because why not? Now, the interesting thing to note here is that we haven't really seen a lot of cards from our opponent, so we don't really know what he's burned through in his deck and what he might have here. However, again, it is an 11k forward, so it would have to be a combination of battle tricks or miracles to buff it to the relevant power that's going to break Titus. So we are feeling very confident to be able to get in for 4 points of damage at this point. So here we're going to just, he hit the Laguna, so he says he's going to dull Titus. We again have used Astrologian, and this is exactly the moment I was just talking about. Now it's stuck. The other thing is I missed the Rosa trigger here. I should be drawing a card off of Shiva. And I forget the exact wording offhand, if it's May or not. If it is May, it is a missed trigger potentially, but if it's not a May effect, then you would get to draw the card as soon as you realize the board state is not accurate, as long as you haven't gone too far past it. So this is where I finally catch it, saying, hey, we hit the, I have Rosa, it does the thing, it gets a draw card, and we draw into the Yuna, which is a feel bad moment because it actually would have been better for us if we would have forgotten and left that on top. And of course, without knowing, there's clearly no malicious intent for not drawing the card because we don't have Geomancer or something to see the top card in our deck. But just once, I would have liked to have hit the Yuna EX burst. It's also worth noting it's not a bad addition if you're seeing a lot of Golbez locally, and maybe you want to run a Cloud of Darkness in the deck as well. It's just kind of a hope and pray against Golbez, but usually the Yuna will be enough of a counter to dig you out of that situation. So again, our opponent is just trying to dig himself out of a board state. We use that Yuna we just had to play Leviathan for 2 since we have the 2-cost Yuna backup, and put that Warrior of Light back into his hand, knowing that he can't discard it for any other crystal points because light and dark cards can't be discarded. Now here we do have a little bit of a stifled draw. We hit the Vikings, we get to draw another card, we get to look one card deeper, and then finally hitting the Cecil here does help us out quite a bit. The downside to this board state is that we then cannot activate Tidus in a pinch and play Cecil here, so we have to take that into consideration when our opponent is threatening with only one unknown card per se, but he's threatening a Water Kick, and we wouldn't have the ability to Astro if needed. So instead we're just going to play the Warrior Light. It's going to buff up all of our smaller guys, which again still is not matching up favorably against that land per se, but we are going to get to draw some cards when he tries to answer it. So attacking here on our end is fairly safe because we know that we can Astro in a pinch. He would again have to have 2 different cards to, again, Shiva plus another effect to get rid of our key blocker, because Minwoo and a 9k Warrior Light is probably just good enough. So we're feeling fairly confident with these attacks, just getting in a point of damage and forcing our opponent to go to 6 so we can hopefully swing for the game on the following turn. And again, these little Vikings might only be 1,000 power individually, but thanks to the Warrior Light and the Waka on the field, they're going to combine powers to be an 8,000 powered first striking party attack. Of course, it'd be a lot better if one of these was mine, but unfortunately we don't have that luxury. So here I arguably get a little too aggressive, though it does force our opponent to have something instead of just losing one of his other forwards. But he does Water Kick our Tidus away when we try to go to attack with it. And then we only have the 2 blockers left. And it looks like he does have a Shiva in hand, but I can't see if there's another... Oh, right, it's the Warrior Light, Shiva, Land, and Bahamut. So, lucky for us, he didn't have a couple more backups, just Bahamut and win here, but he does have Shiva to lock one of them down. And then he couldn't really swing through for the last point of damage that he would need. So he's just going to pass and try to build up his board presence a little bit more and hopefully draw into something and win on the following turn. In that instance, I'm not terribly convinced that you care about the extra blocker, as on the following turns, being able to, or on the following turn, I guess I should say, playing the Bahamut to remove 2 of your opponent's blockers is probably just better, depending on what you think your top decks might be and how many EX bursts, or not EX bursts, what other summons you have left in the deck that could be relevant. So that would be something that you would have to look through the break zone and determine what are the best options. And again, this is one of those instances where Vikings individually are a little bit lackluster by themselves, and we don't have anything that would be great within our hand. I don't remember what was the last couple cards, but ideally what we'd want to see here is a Leviathan of the 1-cost variety, and that's what I was trying to count. And it's certainly not a good probability that is on the top of my deck, but there is a line of play here to attack with the Viking to draw the card and see if we hit anything, because even if we don't, we have enough of a board state where we're fine waiting a turn if necessary. But if we do hit the Leviathan, it is going to win us the game. And of course, keeping in mind that we do have the Astro to activate one of our guys in case we need to have another blocker for the following turn. And one of the things I forget while I'm going through all these motions and counting what cards are left in my deck that could be on top is that land can't block something of higher power than him, which certainly makes this more of a just quickly turn things sideways and we would have won anyway scenario. So I thought he had one extra blocker than he did. And in that case, we do just hit the Leviathan for the extra 2 power, which we were trying to calculate on. And the good news here is that it just makes everything super lethal. So he's forced to block and lose everything now in this situation. And of course, because we are playing the mono water deck, it is going to buff everything up plus 2,000 power, plus 1,000 from Waka. Tidus is huge because of all the other forwards, and all the standard units get plus another 2,000 more for Warrior Light. So here he's just going to go through the motions, realizing that I forgot that land can't block, so we just party attack and get the victory. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Sorry we've only been able to get the 2 games out this week. It's been a little bit rough trying to catch up with our Patreon that we've launched, so check that out if you can. And we've been writing some articles on Longnet, so don't forget to check that out. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next 6 Sages Gaming Duel Series. Have a good one.